So today's session is all about the importance of breath, and I think one of my favorite sayings from doing any mindfulness work is that if you're breathing, there's more right than there is wrong. So that's one of those things, but it's also one of the other things that we can take for granted, and when we bring some focus to it, can be very, very beneficial to us. Specifically, I guess, in the work that I do, the first time I saw breath work really being focused upon is in the work that I do with veterans. So a couple of, but probably about nearly 4 years ago, I started working for a veterans charity, and I saw being demonstrated a process called ha breathing. I nearly started laughing as I said that then, but it's always good to laugh. And I will come on to that in a minute, purely because of how I interpret what that is and the additional things that it does. But why? So I was interested to see it being used there. And it's come up in several different modalities now. And more recently in mindfulness, because I'm a practicing mindfulness teacher as well. So we talk about the breath an awful lot within that, and bringing our focus and attention to the breath, which helps us bring our awareness back to the here and now. And what it also does, it stops our sympathetic nervous system running amok. So the sympathetic, and I pause there because I have a 50-50 chance of getting that the right way around, and I wrote it down, so I do. So the sympathetic nervous system is what's responsible for our fight, flight, and freeze, and it's one of the atomic systems within us, which just is there and will take over when it's needed to, whenever we feel threatened. And unfortunately today, purely because we don't have kind of the natural predators running around, which are kind of obvious today, it's interesting how even the simple notification from a phone can bring an alert or expect a reaction. And over a period of time, if you're in a heightened state of awareness, that can be a simple trigger to take you into a state of anxiety or panic. So the sympathetic system is there and it's still functioning, as we know, but it can also be an enemy to us if it's always alert, and being always in alert status can be detrimental to our well-being. So one of its symptoms is to start taking oxygen away from the brain, and in doing so, it's rerouting it to the major muscle groups, it's stopping digestion, and we start processing, we start working in an automatic function. We're stopping or reducing the cognitive decision making. So if we can consciously catch ourselves and bring in some intended conscious breathing, we can start to reoxygenate the brain. We can start making more decisions about what's happening right now, what's the reality, and start our road to recovery, which can be as simple as 3 short breaths, or just 3 conscious breaths. So in saying all of that, so that's why I feel breathwork is so important, because it can be our simple practice in a pocket to come back to here and now, to stop going into panic, to bring us back from anxiety, and just to bring us back to a calm state where we are making the choices and not the emotions or the sympathetic system. The simple first technique, what I would just share, is what I call basically simple as breathing out for twice as long as you breathe in. So I like to think about it so without thinking about units of measure, without thinking of, say, seconds. So if I were to say, I like to think of breathing in for 2, breathing out for 4. And in saying that, I'm not trying to say breathe in for 2 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds. We are all in a different starting point, perhaps. So it's just a case of you breathe, you count at your rate. It's just basically extending the out breath, because in doing so, it's a natural way of calming down and slowing the heart rate. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to invite, so I'll just do it once as a quick demonstration. And this is where I've got to be aware of camera presence. So is it this hand? Yes, the hand, right. That's the one everybody can see. So I'm going to count in for 2, and I'm going to breathe in for the count of 2, and I'm going to breathe out for a count of 4. Okay, so it's like, it's basically, so simple as that. Okay, you may not do it at that rate, but breathe in for 2, out for 4. But I want you to do that 3 times. Okay, so I'm just going to do it for 4. I'm going to do it for 3 times now. Why do I do it for 4? I don't know. It's 3. Do it for 4. Okay, I'm going to do it now. You do it in your own time. Oh, well, it must be calm and relaxed because someone's going to join me. 1 second. Nothing like being live. That we're not. Okay, so what I'd like to do, actually, if you come off mute, just ask you a quick question. And if you may not be able to answer it in a way that I'm curious to ask. Go on, Kat, come off mute. Did anybody notice in doing that? Because only 3 times, and you might have to do it longer, but did anybody notice any sense of headiness?
Yes.
Okay. So so that can come, it's interesting. And I just wanted to ask it now before implying it before. If it happens, just be aware of your own well-being, because we're not trying to induce somebody getting giddy and affecting balance. Also, if you do notice it, then be curious to place your focus of attention onto your solar plex, because there's a nice little kind of saying, say the basic energy goes where your attention. Basically wherever you're paying focus, the energy goes. So if you're focusing on your mind, it can cause you to get a little bit heady. In addition to obviously reoxygenating. So just be mindful if it happens, be curious to focus on the solar plex, see if that helps. If not, just be aware of your own well-being. So let's just try it quickly again. Just maybe
Andrew, can I ask you about the solar plex? You say about doing that. I don't really know what solar plex is.
Sorry, good point. Yeah. Assumptive there. So it's that area. So if you follow the kind of the breastbone down, straight down, and it's where it just starts to go soft, just below that kind of junction of the rib cage. So that area there. So if we're focusing there, then that'll help. And also when you're breathing in, just notice if your tummy is extending. So this is and I'll tell you why in a moment. This is the best thing for us, is the tummy breathe. Okay, so again, so I invite you to do it 3 more times. So breathing in for 2 and breathing out for 4. Okay. So I know, just for me, that really just calms me down. Sarah, did you notice any difference in the kind of the head then? Was it better?
Yeah, and I will use that in future, because I think I've told you before, I suffer really badly with travel sickness, and I tend to focus on what's going on in my head and how I feel sick, but actually by focusing down there, it stopped things from spinning here.
Absolutely, yeah. So let me just quickly check in. So Kat, Angela, did you get the sense of almost the calming down from just that then?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so in some respects, it's that's it in a nutshell. It's just then when you can add some additional flavorings and maybe a little bit more information. So I drew attention then to tummy breathing. So we talk about when we breathe in, our tummy is extending, and when we breathe out, our tummy is coming in, which really is confusing when we say breathe in as if you're going to get through a small gap. How does that work? No. So, but interesting. The other thing to notice is if you lay on your back and to do any form of exercise, you naturally just tummy breathe all of a sudden. It just happens. And, so I'm about to laugh now because if anybody knows me, I talk a lot. So just actually from talking, you notice you regulate your breathing, because as you're talking, you're using the air you've inhaled. So you just kind of pause for a moment to breathe in, but you're almost doing that by inadvertently, just through a conversation. Because I know I used to suffer terribly from anxiety around talking. You wouldn't believe it, but I did. And and it really affects your voice. You get anxious. It's the chest is tight, and so it's a good starting point just to kind of maybe do a couple of these breaths if that's coming on. Okay, so a couple of more alternatives that some people talk about. Some people talk about box breathing, just as another way to get the rhythm, and that's as simple as imagining a rectangle in front of you, and as you imagine tracing the perimeter of the rectangle, that you would say breathe in on the verticals and breathe out on the horizontals. So which could be thought of as another way of saying breathing in for 2 and breathing out for 4. So you would like, that's just another adaptation. And I guess I'm giving you this just in case you're going to share it with anybody else. Then it's just another way of explaining it. Okay. So when I started this conversation by saying when I first came across any breathing in any of the modalities I work with, and Ha breathing was the first thing that I came across. Ha breathing is simply that when you breathe in, it's just literally through the nose, but when you breathe out, you vocalize, literally just with a sound. Which is a really interesting thing to do with people for the first time, because you suddenly get really paranoid about making a noise. So you've done the breathing in for 2 and out for 4, just in 3 successions. So what I'm going to invite you to do, I'll just do a quick demonstration now of maybe a couple of the breaths, and then we'll do maybe 3 or 4 together. Okay, so a quick demonstration is. So it doesn't have to be anything outlandish. It's not yodeling. It's not growling. It's simply just it's activating in some respects the vocal cords, ever so slightly. It's like it's hard breathing. It has its origins in a practice called Huna, which comes from Hawaii. And there's some other practices which are coming a little bit more mainstream with that, around forgiveness, Ho'oponopono, which is becoming quite popular at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to do that now. We'll do that maybe just 3 or 4 times, and then we'll just quickly check in. Okay, starting again. Okay. Just take a pause for a moment and just check in. Just notice how you're feeling. And I guess my question or my invitation of curiosity is, do you notice any difference from where you're doing it without vocalizing to when you're doing it with vocalizing now?
Helps me concentrate more on the time that it's taking.
Yeah, interesting. I find that as well, actually.
I also think when you're engaging your vocal cords, it stops you from over exhaling.
So almost controls it more?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. Yeah.
And you're concentrating on other things as well, aren't you? You're sort of not thinking of what's going on perhaps externally. You are just concentrating on breathing, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing, it's because it really interested me, and bearing in mind we're not talking here of anything which is modern, for want of a word. Again, it's come from a very old tradition. So it's curious, and I could only speculate how that came about. But we have, I don't know if another term which is being floated around today is there's the thing called Polyvagal Theory. And it's it's referring to the vagus nerve in the body, which I think vagal, it's basically called the wandering nerve, and I think vagal is the Latin term for wandering. So polyvagal theory talks about the health benefits of stimulating the vagus nerve, and interestingly enough, it actually goes along. It's around the vocal cords. So, and it's also around the lungs, almost kind of underneath here. So we're actually, by taking that deep tummy breath, we're potentially stimulating the vagus nerve. And then also by adding in a very soft vocalization, we are potentially stimulating the vagus nerve. So I'm curious about that. I can't tell you categorically that it's stimulating that at the same time. But I'm curious because these are things which are coming and being discussed a lot currently. What else do I want to say about that? In what we've just done, we've just simply done maybe 3 or 4 of those breaths. And I'd like to say always be mindful of your own well-being. If you were to get giddy, then stop. Because we don't want to kind of something which is intended to help and calm you. We don't want it to be there causing a problem. So always be aware. And I just noticed when I was breathing a minute ago, I noticed my shoulders rise, which isn't good practice because we really should be focusing on the tummy. So I need to be mindful about that. It wasn't intended, but if you're breathing kind of high up here, then your shoulders are going to rise. But so you really, that isn't something we're looking to encourage. Oh, and I forgot to say why tummy breathing. If we look at the anatomy of lungs, they are actually they're bowel shaped. So the biggest capacity of the lungs is at the bottom. So which is why if we're extending the tummy when we breathe out, we're making room for those lungs to expand at the bottom. So we're taking on we're taking on the biggest quantity of air and using the biggest capacity in the bottom section of the lungs as we go. There are many other breathing techniques out there which will focus on filling up the lungs from in many different directions, but it's just that when we're talking and promoting tummy breathing, it's so that we can really take on and make use of the anatomy and where the biggest volume of air can be stored. So before I go on, is anybody any questions from what I've shared so far? Any curiosity?
Yeah, I've got one question, Andrew. Would you, when we're doing these breathing exercises, you quite rightly said, and I could see myself as well when we were practicing, and would you advise that we use a mirror and watch ourselves, especially when we're getting used to it, because it's something new for me, is if we're learning how to do this, would you advise doing it in front of a mirror so that you can check out your shoulders, you can check out your tummy, you can, check out how it's affecting the rest of your body?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think my answer to that would be, it would depend on the purpose of wanting to get that feedback, because I think we started the session with the intention of this being a practice in a pocket. So as long as we're getting the desired effects that we want from being able to calm down, create a sense of relaxation, then technique doesn't really matter. I think it's the results that are really going to count. So, I think as we've emphasized, to do the tummy breathing, any slight kind of rise in the shoulders isn't going to be a problem. And in fact, we're all different. It could be that we're carrying tension today. It's nothing to do with me rushing back from me double booking myself and arriving with plenty of time. So yeah, it is a good question. I think if once we get curious about it even more, it's something maybe to challenge yourselves with, just to notice, am I fully extending, am I fully tummy breathing? But we all have our own anatomy, so I would say no, let's just let go. I was just making an observation there, just so that if you noticed that, and I was saying, well, you shouldn't raise your shoulders, and I was like, no, just sorry. It's one of these things. It's a slight rise going on, but I am intending to tummy breathe. But yeah, is that okay?
Brilliant.
Yes, it would really help with. Does it really help with insomnia and things like that, Andrew? If
yeah,
you can,
because sorry, I interrupted you. I got excited about answering that then.
No, that was it really.
Yes, in as much as I think, coming back to an observation you made, Kat, earlier, that it can give you something else to think about. Because, and it's a sweeping statement, and it's a generalization to say that insomnia is coming from a busy brain, a busy mind. If that's the case, then we really want to quieten it down. We want to calm it down. We want it to relax. So we can give it something else to focus on for a period of time, and then as you naturally slow and relax anyway, it just becomes a much more calming and sedative. And you're saying it's a big part of mindfulness practice is the breathing, is consciously breathing. So you're focusing only on the breath, and it will just slow the mind down. I'm going to quickly mention, because I've just noticed we're coming up towards past, is there's a technique, and I had it actually mentioned to me today. So earlier I was working with Charlie's in the forest, the cancer support group, and I was talking about the breathing, and a lady mentioned to me the technique 4-7-8, and I've heard of it, but I've not something I've practiced. So I thought, I'll quickly look it up, and I think I've heard of it in a different number sequence. I'm not quite sure. But within this, the practice is to basically, you start by fully exhale, and you close your mouth and breathe in for 4, hold your breath for 7, and then breathe out for 8. So it's 4, 7, 8. So I'm going to share my curiosity, and I'm going to invite you to do the same. So it's breathing in for 4, holding the breath for 7, breathing out for 8. So perhaps we'll just do 2 in your own time, just to see how that is, when you're ready.
That was good. I can imagine on the onset of a panic attack, maybe, or an anxiety rising of anxiety. I can imagine if you can remember to do that, I can.
And that's exactly it does in its description. It calls it very sedative, and obviously the biggest shift there is that we're holding the breath for a period of time as well.
Yeah.
So, and I guess, and that's what we're talking about here. We're kind of, I'm sharing ideas so that there's no right, there's no wrong. It's just whatever feels right and works for you, whether it's simply breathing in for 2 and out for 4, whether it's following the shape of a rectangle, whether it's adding in the vocalization, maybe to add that extra control in the exhale, or whether it's doing the 4, 7, 8. And it talks about in the exhale to do it through the mouth as well. So you're slowing it down, not audibly, but maybe almost like as if you're whistling. Yeah, so those are the breathing techniques that I wanted to share, just again with the intention of creating that slowing us down to kind of create that calm and maybe stepping away from panic and anxiety. But again, if you've got any quick questions or anything like that, we've got a couple of minutes.
Do you want to share what else you've got coming up for the rest of the week?
Yeah. So the rest of the week is how we see the world is something again, which is tomorrow's session, which is something I'm really passionate about because it starts bringing in the concept of neuro-linguistic programming. So then I'm stepping into the next day is 3-step breathing space, which is really it's a real practice in the pocket for mindfulness. And now I've got 2 things wrote down here, which are stop and sorry, 1 second, I need to move past my microphone. Rain. And both of those are, again, mindfulness practices. What I'm thinking of doing, and I just quickly spoke to Sarah earlier, what I hadn't put in the schedule was emotional freedom technique. And emotional freedom technique, or EFT, or tapping, is something I use constantly with any clients I work with. So I think it would be brilliant to share that in a 30-minute segment. So that will come in towards the end of the week for sure. So yeah, how we see the world, 3-step breathing space, some other practices in the pocket from mindfulness, and emotional freedom technique.